The sun had barely risen when the old wooden door of the Matthews house creaked open. Granny Eleanor, 78 years old and frail, but still dignified, stood in the hallway with her knitting basket clutched tightly to her chest. The smell of stale coffee and toast filled the air, a morning routine she had known for decades. Yet today, there was tension, a heaviness that even the bright sunlight couldn't chase away. Her son, Richard, now in his mid-40s, had always been a practical man. Business-minded, always thinking about investments, returns, and efficiency. He had run the household with a strict sense of order since his father's death. But practicality, Eleanor had learned over the years, often came at the cost of kindness. "Mom," Richard said, his voice clipped, "we need to talk." Eleanor set the basket down, her fingers tightening around the yarn. "About what, Richard?" she asked gently. She had learned long ago that whenever he said, "we need to talk," it never led to anything good. "I can't take care of you anymore," he said bluntly, pacing the living room. "It's too much responsibility. The house, the bills, your health. I have my own life, my own family to think about." Eleanor felt a cold pang in her chest. She had raised him with love, nurtured him through childhood, through mistakes and triumphs, always believing he would understand her in her old age. Yet here he was, speaking of abandonment as though it were a simple business decision. "I've taken care of this house and this family for 50 years, Richard," she said softly. "Is this what you call gratitude?" Richard shook his head. "It's not about gratitude, Mom. It's about reality. You're living in the past, and I can't do this anymore." Eleanor's heart ached, but she didn't cry. She had learned to mask her pain, to endure silently. She watched her son pack a few boxes of her belongings, old photo albums, her knitting basket, a few favorite books, into the trunk of his car. There was a finality in his movements, a sharp edge that cut through the warmth of their home. "You're going to an old age home," he said. "I've arranged everything. It's safe, clean, and, well, it's the only option." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Safe, yes. But home is where love is, Richard. Not walls and routines." He said nothing, simply closed the car door and drove away, leaving her standing on the porch with the morning sunlight casting long shadows over her wrinkled face. The sound of the engine fading felt like the sound of her heart breaking. The old age home was nothing like the home she had known. Bright, clinical corridors, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the sterile smell of antiseptic greeted her. The staff were polite but distant, and the other residents kept to themselves, lost in memories Eleanor could only imagine. She tried to settle in, unpacking her few belongings and arranging them on the small shelf beside her bed. But the loneliness was suffocating. Days turned into weeks. Eleanor spent hours staring out the window, watching the seasons change, the world moving on without her. She missed the warmth of her home, the laughter of her son when he was a boy, the familiar creak of the stairs, the smell of her husband's old pipe, now long gone. Yet she endured. She met other residents, shared stories, and quietly became a comforting presence to those around her. Her kindness, patience, and wisdom earned her respect, even if her own family had abandoned her. Meanwhile, Richard's life continued in its carefully structured way. His wife, Margaret, and their 2 children, Michael and Emma, never questioned his decision. Life was convenient, orderly, and free of the burdens Eleanor had represented. But sometimes, late at night, Richard would hear echoes of his mother's voice in his mind, soft words he could no longer see or touch. It was Michael, his eldest son, who first noticed the emptiness that lingered in the corners of their house. Michael was 16, thoughtful, and more sensitive than his father would ever admit. He saw the tension in his mother's face, the sharp edge in his father's commands, and something inside him stirred. One evening, he stumbled across a letter his father had carelessly left on the kitchen counter, an envelope addressed to Eleanor, detailing the move to the old age home. Curiosity turned into concern, concern into action. Michael had always been close to his grandmother, visiting her often as a child, listening to her stories of courage, love, and resilience. He remembered how she had taught him to bake, to care for the small things in life, and to treat people with respect. He couldn't reconcile the image of her frail and lonely in a sterile institution with the vibrant, wise woman he knew. The next weekend, Michael decided to visit her. He took the bus alone, carrying a small gift, a knitted scarf Eleanor had made years ago for him, now mended and patched with care. Eleanor felt a cold pang in her chest. She had raised him with love, nurtured him through childhood, through mistakes and triumphs, always believing he would understand her in her old age. Yet here he was, speaking of abandonment as though it were a simple business decision. "I've taken care of this house and this family for 50 years, Richard," she said softly. "Is this what you call gratitude?" Richard shook his head. "It's not about gratitude, Mom. It's about reality. You're living in the past, and I can't do this anymore." Eleanor's heart ached, but she didn't cry. She had learned to mask her pain, to endure silently. She watched her son pack a few boxes of her belongings, old photo albums, her knitting basket, a few favorite books, into the trunk of his car. There was a finality in his movements, a sharp edge that cut through the warmth of their home. "You're going to an old-age home," he said. "I've arranged everything. It's safe, clean, and, well, it's the only option." Eleanor swallowed hard. "Safe, yes. But home is where love is, Richard. Not walls and routines." He said nothing, simply closed the car door and drove away, leaving her standing on the porch with the morning sunlight casting long shadows over her wrinkled face. The sound of the engine fading felt like the sound of her heart breaking. The old-age home was nothing like the home she had known. Bright, clinical corridors, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the sterile smell of antiseptic greeted her. The staff were polite but distant, and the other residents kept to themselves, lost in memories Eleanor could only imagine. She tried to settle in, unpacking her few belongings and arranging them on the small shelf beside her bed. But the loneliness was suffocating. The sun had barely risen when the old wooden door of the Matthews house creaked open. Granny Eleanor, 78 years old and frail, but still dignified, stood in the hallway with her knitting basket clutched tightly to her chest. The smell of stale coffee and toast filled the air, a morning routine she had known for decades. Yet today, there was tension, a heaviness that even the bright sunlight couldn't chase away. Her son, Richard, now in his mid-40s, had always been a practical man. Business-minded, always thinking about investments, returns, and efficiency. He had run the household with a strict sense of order since his father's death. But practicality, Eleanor had learned over the years, often came at the cost of kindness. "Mom," Richard said, his voice clipped, "we need to talk." Eleanor set the basket down, her fingers tightening around the yarn. "About what, Richard?" she asked gently. She had learned long ago that whenever he said, "we need to talk," it never led to anything good. "I can't take care of you anymore," he said bluntly, pacing the living room. "It's too much responsibility. The house, the bills, your health. I have my own life, my own family to think about." A scarf for herself, but in her mind, she began imagining what the future might bring. One day, perhaps her son, or even her grandchildren, would understand. And when that day came, she would be ready, with arms open, heart full, and wisdom to share. The sun dipped low, casting golden streaks through the windows of the old-age home. Eleanor looked out, a sense of serenity settling over her. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that life, in its mysterious way, had a plan that even Richard could not see yet. For Eleanor, the journey of abandonment had become a journey of empowerment. The walls of the old-age home were no longer confining, they were her sanctuary. And the story was only beginning. The weeks following Michael's visits had transformed Eleanor. The old-age home, once a place of loneliness and sterile routine, now felt alive. Her laughter resonated through the hallways, and her wisdom guided both residents and staff alike. Eleanor's presence had become a beacon of warmth, and slowly, the home had become a community rather than a mere institution. Meanwhile, Richard tried to focus on work, on keeping life perfectly ordered, but a quiet unease lingered in his heart. Michael's words echoed persistently in his mind, "Safe isn't the same as loved." The thought gnawed at him. Every time he saw Michael's disapproving or thoughtful gaze, he felt the weight of his own neglect. One evening, after another long day at the office, Richard sat in his study, staring blankly at the wall. Margaret was out, and the house was quiet. He finally broke the silence with a sigh. Maybe I was too harsh, he muttered to himself. He thought of his mother, frail yet resilient, waiting somewhere in that old-age home, probably knitting quietly, waiting to be acknowledged. That weekend, Richard found himself unable to resist any longer. Michael, who had been persistent in his insistence, convinced his father to join him on a visit. "You'll see, Dad," Michael said, "it's not what you think. Grandma isn't waiting to be pitted, she's thriving. And maybe it'll remind you what family really means." Reluctantly, Richard agreed. The drive was silent, the tension between father and son thick, yet beneath it, a thread of anticipation lingered. Richard couldn't help but feel a mix of guilt and curiosity. He had imagined his mother as frail and lonely, perhaps regretting the life he had forced her into. But Michael insisted, and he reluctantly obeyed. When they arrived, Eleanor was in the garden, helping a group of residents plant flowers. The sight made Richard pause. She moved gracefully despite her age, her eyes sparkling as she guided others, her hands steady and patient. The old-age home, once dull and impersonal, had been transformed. Bright colors, laughter, and the hum of life filled every corner. "Mom," Michael called out as they approached. Eleanor turned, and her face lit up with recognition and joy. She stepped forward, her frail frame belying a strength of spirit that Richard had not anticipated. "Richard," she said softly, her voice calm but firm, "you came." Richard swallowed hard, unsure what to say. "Mom, I thought you might need?" Eleanor interrupted gently, shaking her head with a small smile. "I don't need anything you have withheld. I have found what I need here: purpose, dignity, and family." Richard looked around, noticing for the first time the subtle order and care she had instilled. Residents were chatting, sharing stories, and laughing. Staff worked in harmony, guided subtly by Eleanor's quiet authority. Richard realized the home was no longer just a facility. It was alive with love, with respect, and with the gentle leadership of a woman he had once thought powerless. Michael stepped closer. "Dad, see what I've been telling you? Grandma's not just surviving here, she's thriving. And she's made this place a home for everyone." Richard nodded slowly, guilt settling like a heavy stone in his chest. He watched Eleanor move from resident to resident, offering comfort, guidance, and warmth. Something inside him shifted. For the first time, he understood what he had taken for granted. After a while, Eleanor invited them inside for tea. The room was cozy, adorned with personal touches. She had added handmade decorations, books arranged neatly on the shelves, and photographs of residents engaged in various activities. Richard sat quietly, overwhelmed by a mix of pride and shame. Eleanor poured tea for them, her hands steady and deliberate. "Richard," she said finally, "this home is more than walls and rules. It's a place of dignity. A place where people are remembered, not just managed. And if you had been here sooner, you would have seen it yourself." Richard lowered his gaze. I didn't understand, Mom. I thought I was helping you. But I see now. I was wrong." Eleanor placed a hand on his. "It's never too late to make amends. Actions speak louder than intentions, Richard. You have a chance now." Michael smiled, relief evident on his face. "See, Dad? You can start fixing it. And you'll see, she's stronger than we ever imagined." The conversation hung in the air, a mixture of apology and understanding. Eleanor sipped her tea, her eyes thoughtful. "This home," she said, "was never meant to be a punishment for me. I could have let bitterness take over, but instead, I chose purpose. And that is the greatest revenge against neglect, thriving despite it." Richard nodded slowly, realizing the truth in her words. The old-age home, once a symbol of his supposed responsibility, had become a monument to his mother's resilience. It was not a place of confinement, it was a place of empowerment, guided by her wisdom. Over the next few months, Richard and Eleanor began to rebuild their relationship. It was not immediate, nor was it easy. Old wounds ran deep, and pride sometimes got in the way. But Michael's insistence and Eleanor's patient guidance slowly began to bridge the gap. Richard began volunteering at the home, helping with small tasks, interacting with the residents, and learning the lessons his mother had always embodied: kindness, patience, and the importance of community. One day, as Eleanor walked through the garden with Michael, she paused to watch a group of residents tending to the flowers. Their laughter, their care for one another, and the way they had embraced her guidance warmed her heart. "You see, Michael," she said softly, "life has a way of correcting itself. Those who abandon love may eventually find themselves in need of it, just as we all do. But it is never too late to create something meaningful." Michael nodded, looking up at his grandmother with admiration. "I understand, Grandma. And I want to help too. Maybe one day, this home can be more than just a shelter. It can be a place where everyone feels family." Eleanor smiled. "That is my hope, Michael. That is my dream. And one day, when you are older, perhaps you will continue it. But for now, we focus on today. And today, we live fully, with purpose, love, and dignity." Meanwhile, Richard had been observing quietly. He realized that his son's admiration for Eleanor mirrored what he had once felt. And he began to understand the cyclical nature of life, the way love and care passed from generation to generation, how neglect could be corrected with effort, and how purpose could transform even the bleakest circumstances. As the months went by, Eleanor's influence grew. She began holding workshops for the staff, teaching them not just about care routines, but about empathy, patience, and the importance of seeing each resident as a unique individual with a life story. Her ideas were innovative yet rooted in wisdom and experience. Staff members began to embrace her guidance, and slowly, the old age home's reputation changed. Families who had once hesitated to place their elders in the facility now sought it out, drawn by the warmth, dignity, and love that Eleanor had cultivated. Richard observed all of this quietly, humbled. He saw how his mother's resilience had created something extraordinary. His son, Michael, was learning invaluable lessons from her example. And he realized that Eleanor's wisdom was not just shaping the old age home, it was shaping his own family. One rainy afternoon, Eleanor received a letter from the local community board. The old age home had been nominated for an award for excellence in elderly care, recognition of the remarkable environment she had helped create. She smiled, not out of pride, but out of quiet satisfaction. The work she had put in, the love she had poured into the lives of the residents, was being acknowledged. But more importantly, she had reclaimed her dignity and purpose, transforming what could have been an ending into a new beginning. Later that evening, as the rain drummed gently against the windows, Eleanor sat with Michael and Richard. "You see," she said, her voice calm but resolute, "life is full of lessons. Sometimes they are harsh, sometimes they are gentle. But the greatest lesson is this: love, kindness, and purpose are never wasted. They return to you, often in ways you cannot foresee." Richard reached out, taking his mother's hand. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything. I failed you." Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "Richard, apologies are meaningless without change. But I see change in you. And that is enough for me." Michael smiled, proud of both his father and grandmother. "We can make this home even better," he said. "Together." Eleanor's eyes gleamed. "Yes, Michael. Together, we can build a legacy of love, care, and dignity. Not just for this home, but for everyone who will come after us. And remember, true strength is not in holding power over others, but in nurturing it for the good of all." From that day on, the Matthews family worked together to expand the old age home. Eleanor guided, Michael assisted, and Richard learned the art of patience and empathy. Slowly, the home became more than a refuge. It became a sanctuary, a model of compassion, and a testament to the transformative power of love. And in the evenings, when the sun dipped low and the residents gathered in the garden or the lounge, Eleanor would sit quietly, knitting, watching the laughter and warmth she had helped create. Her eyes would sometimes drift to Richard and Michael, seeing in them the growth, understanding, and love that had once seemed lost. Life had come full circle. The woman who had been cast aside by her own son had not only survived, but had thrived. She had created a home where love was abundant, where dignity was respected. The morning sun poured golden light over the old-age home, casting a warm glow on the gardens and pathways. The place had grown since Eleanor first arrived. What was once a small, quiet facility had transformed into a bustling sanctuary of care, laughter, and love. Birds chirped in the trees, and flowers swayed gently in the breeze. Inside, the residents moved about happily, chatting, playing cards, or reading quietly in cozy corners. Eleanor walked among them, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes sparkling with pride. "Good morning, Mrs. Eleanor," called Mrs. Thompson, a longtime resident, waving a hand. "The tea is ready." Eleanor smiled warmly. "Thank you, my dear. I'll join you shortly." As she moved through the corridors, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had been abandoned by her own son, Richard, and sent to an old-age home she had never imagined herself living in. Yet, through patience, kindness, and determination, she had turned what could have been a sorrowful chapter into a legacy of love and dignity. Today was a special day. Michael had insisted that they invite Richard and Margaret, along with their children, to witness the culmination of Eleanor's efforts. They had even arranged a small ceremony to formally dedicate the home as Eleanor's sanctuary, a name befitting the warmth and care it represented. When Richard arrived, Eleanor was in the garden, arranging flowers for the event. At first, he hesitated, unsure of how to face her after all that had happened. But when Eleanor turned and smiled at him, all the tension and guilt in his chest seemed to melt. "Mom," Richard said softly, his voice trembling, I see now. You've built something incredible here." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "It wasn't just me, Richard. The residents, the staff, Michael, we've all worked together. But it is true that I could have done nothing without resilience and a little stubbornness." She chuckled, a sound filled with warmth. "And life." Michael stepped forward, his face glowing with excitement. "Dad, you should see it. Grandma has transformed this place. It's a home, not just a building." Richard nodded, humbled. "I can see that now. I've been blind, Mom. I failed to understand what family really means." Eleanor reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's never too late to make things right. Actions speak louder than words, Richard. Today, you can begin anew." Margaret and the children followed, marveling at the home. Emma, the youngest, ran ahead to greet the residents, laughing as she helped Mrs. Thompson set out cups of tea. Michael held his grandmother's hand, his pride evident in every step. The small ceremony began in the garden, decorated with colorful banners and flowers. Eleanor stood before the residents, staff, and her family, her presence commanding yet gentle. Today, she began, her voice steady, "We celebrate more than just a building. We celebrate a place where dignity, respect, and love thrive. A place where every resident is seen, heard, and valued. This is not just an old-age home, it is a family. And every one of you, residents and staff alike, are part of that family." Applause erupted, some residents clapping enthusiastically, some wiping away tears. Richard, watching his mother, felt a profound sense of awe. He realized that his mother's strength had not only saved her own dignity, but had uplifted an entire community. After the ceremony, Eleanor guided her family through the home. She showed them the activity rooms, the reading corners, the cozy lounges, and the vibrant garden. Every detail reflected her care, her attention to the emotional as well as physical well-being of the residents. "This is incredible, Mom," Richard said quietly, his voice tinged with emotion. "I never imagined something so beautiful could grow from what I thought was abandonment." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Sometimes, Richard, life pushes us into situations we don't understand. But it is how we respond that defines us. You are learning that now, and I am proud of you." Michael smiled. "Dad, you should help more. You have a lot to give, and Grandma has shown us all the way. Richard nodded, finally understanding. I will, Michael. I promise I will be more present from now on. Days turned into weeks, and the Matthews family began spending more time at Eleanor's sanctuary. Richard helped with administrative tasks, Margaret organized small community events, and Michael and Emma became regular visitors, interacting with the residents and learning from their stories. Eleanor continued to lead with grace. She introduced workshops on storytelling, gardening, and even art therapy. She encouraged the residents to mentor one another, creating bonds of friendship and support. The home thrived under her guidance, and its reputation spread far and wide. Families from neighboring towns began visiting, eager to place their elders in a home where love, respect, and care were abundant. One afternoon, Eleanor sat in her favorite chair by the window, knitting a scarf for a new resident. Michael sat beside her, watching intently. Grandma, he said softly, do you ever regret how things started? Being sent here by Dad? Eleanor looked out the window, smiling gently. Regret is a heavy burden, Michael. I could have chosen to carry it, to dwell on the hurt. But instead, I chose purpose. Every challenge, every heartbreak, brought me here. And now, I am exactly where I am meant to be. Michael nodded, understanding the depth of her wisdom. I hope I can be half as strong as you when I grow up. Eleanor laughed softly. Strength isn't about never falling, my dear. It's about rising every time you do. And I see that strength in you already. Weeks later, Richard approached Eleanor with a proposal. Mom, I've been thinking, what if we expand the home? Create more rooms, more facilities, so more people can benefit from your vision. Eleanor's eyes lit up. Richard, that would be wonderful. But remember, it's not about size, it's about heart. Every expansion must retain the spirit of love and care we have cultivated here. Richard nodded. I understand. And with Michael and Emma's help, we can make sure it does. The family worked tirelessly together, blending Eleanor's vision with practical execution. Slowly, the home grew, not just in size, but in the depth of care it provided. New residents arrived, welcomed with open arms. Staff members were trained in Eleanor's philosophy of empathy and dignity. And the home became a model for others, inspiring similar initiatives across the region. Years passed, and Eleanor's hair grew whiter, her steps slower, but her spirit remained undiminished. She watched as her family, once fractured, now worked alongside her, united in purpose and love. Richard had become a devoted presence, learning the true meaning of family. Michael and Emma, inspired by their grandmother, pursued careers in care and community service. And the residents of Eleanor's sanctuary thrived, living not just in safety, but in a home filled with warmth, friendship, and respect. One quiet evening, Eleanor sat in the garden, watching the sunset. Richard joined her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Mom, he said softly, I understand now. You weren't just surviving, you were building a legacy. And I am proud to be part of it. Eleanor smiled, her eyes misty with emotion. Life has a way of teaching us, Richard. Sometimes through joy, sometimes through pain. But it is never too late to choose love, to create something lasting, and to heal what was once broken. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the garden glowed in golden light. Residents and staff gathered, some walking hand in hand, others laughing and chatting. The home, once a place of abandonment, was now a sanctuary, a living testament to resilience, love, and the enduring power of family. Eleanor looked around, her heart full. She had been cast aside, but she had risen. She had built something extraordinary from the ashes of neglect. And in doing so, she had not only restored her own dignity, but had transformed the lives of everyone around her, including her son, her grandchildren, and countless residents who had found a true home under her guidance. Granny Eleanor had not just survived her trials, she had triumphed. And as she sat there, surrounded by the warmth of her family and the laughter of the residents, she knew that her journey, though filled with hardship, had led her to the greatest gift of all, love restored, family united, and a legacy that would endure for generations. And in the quiet of the evening, as the stars began to twinkle above, Eleanor whispered softly to herself, a contented smile on her face. Home is not a place. It is the love we create, the care we give, and the hearts we touch. And that is eternal.